Let's learn about weighted average. And to learn about weighted average, let's recap what a simple average is. Taking an example of employee satisfaction survey, let's say I'm a manager of a big group of 60 people, and I'm asking them every quarter how happy you are working in this team. And then they give me a rating from 0 to 100. 100 being I'm super happy, I can't be more happier. And 0 is like I'm so sad that I'm working with this group. So I can look at all of those people and all of their ratings that they give me, and I just divide it by the number of people who gave me the ratings. I get a simple average. So let's imagine my simple average was 97.3. Yeah, I got on an average 97.3 rating. So that's my simple average. I asked my team of 60 people, and some of them may respond, some of them may not respond, but for all of those who did respond, I look at their responses and then calculate an average. It could very well be that from the 60 people, only one person responded, and then they gave me a 97.3. And so my average is 97.3. One person, when I use that one person's data point to represent my entire team as if their rating is the same as everyone else's rating, and that's a simple average, yeah? It could very well be that two people responded, they both gave me 100, so my average is 100. Or it could very well be that one gave me a 0 and the other person gave me 100, so my average is 50. So that's simple average. But weighted average is useful when every data point is not equal. Weighted average is useful when every data point is not equal. So let's look at the same manager, 60 people. But we start to look at the groups or the teams in this manager's hierarchy, and there could be a group with 30 people in it, another group with 20 people, another group with 10. So we start to see that one group represented almost 50% of the group, the other slightly less, and the third one much lesser. So what we see is, out of the 30 people with 10% response rate, only 3 actually participated in the survey. With 20, group 20, group 2 with 20 people, only 50% response rate, so 10%. Group 3 with 10 people, but 100% responded, so 10 people. So even though I have 60 people in my group, only 23 actually participated. And when they participated in this survey, they could give me ratings. Imagine that the average rating that these 3 people from group 1 gave me was 80. Average rating from these 10 responses from group 2 was 100. And average rating from these 10 people from this group 3 is 100. So I have 3 averages. Yeah, I can calculate a simple average by just looking at these 23 data points and calculating a simple average like this: 3 times 80, because 3 people gave me 80 as my rating, 10 people gave me 100 rating, 10 other people gave another 100 rating. So 3 times 80, 10 times 100, 10 times 100 divided by the number of people who actually gave the rating. So 3 plus 10 plus 10. That gives me a 97.3. So if I just look at the responses and then say, hey, I got a 97%, 97.3 employee satisfaction score, meaning 97.3%. It's really high number, yeah? And that's your simple average. That's your simple average, yeah? But we start to realize that this is the biggest group, 50%. They are much lower in rating. They're only giving an 80% employee satisfaction rating, which is much lower than the 97.3 that's the simple average. So you quickly realize that, hey, I need to represent the 80 score that I got from this group as not just these 3 people, but representing all of these 30 people. Yeah. So then that's how weighted average works. So you look at the average rating that you got from these 3 people, assume that to be what these 30 people would have given you. So you do 30 times 80 plus 20 times 100, 20 times 100. Similarly, we do that for this, times 10 times 100. Then you get divided by the entire group, right? So 30 plus 20 plus 10 instead of number of people responded, so 60. then you get a weighted average of 90. It's much lower than 97. So you calculate the weighted average by looking at your averages of responses within the group, and then assume those averages to be representative of those representative weights will come from the groups that you actually have, in this case number of people. Then you get a weighted average that's much more closer to reality than what you think. Yeah, it's much more closer. 90 is much more closer to 80 than 97, because imagine this group should have the largest contribution. In this case, we start to see that this will be 30 divided by 60, so 50% contribution of this number 80. Versus here it will be 3 divided by 26, 23, close to 13% contribution here. Yeah? So 13 versus 50%. That's pretty massive. So 50% is an accurate representation because this group is actually suffering quite a bit. And then this group is doing really well, but it's a smaller group. So calculating a weighted average is super helpful. So now you know, hey, my weighted average is 90. So my employee satisfaction is actually 90, not 97.3. Once you know, okay, it's not 97, it's 90, then you are actually closer to the reality of what's really going on in your team. And you did that by factoring in what size of the group is and what is their response rate. You're not assuming everyone is participating. You know that there's a lower participation rate. So as leader, what you could do is you could start looking at weighted average, because then that really represents what majority of your group is weighting. The weight is going to be the majority of it's going to lean towards the majority signal, which is representing of what's actually happening. At the same time, you could also start to focus on improving this response rate. Higher the response rate, the more closer it is to reality. Because it could very well be that once it goes to 20%, maybe it's not 80, it's 85. Maybe the group, this is the lower bound. Maybe it's actually the upper bound. Maybe you find out that when this percentage response goes to 20% of this bigger group, this actually falls to 70. So now that's more closer and much more representative of your overall score. So higher response rate is super important, but at the same time looking at what weight or what proportion of people are giving you what scores through weighted average is super important. And then the final thing, right? You realize that hey, it's not 97, it's 90, but you also need to now look at like, okay, what does this 90 actually mean? Where is it coming from? You could get a weighted average of 90 by getting each of these groups to be at 90. That's simple. But you could also get a weighted average of 90 when these two groups are doing relatively well and this group is suffering. That's still 90. Similarly, you could also get this situation where this group is performing really, really well, really badly compared to both of these other groups. So they are pulling the weight higher than this group. So really understanding what's going on individually in the group is the next level of analysis you as leaders would want to do. Not just first representing the reality really well as to what's really happening for majority of the groups by using the weights, but then doing a deep dive individually within the group, saying, hey, I'm not just going to look at 90, I'm going to go deep dive into, if this is the case, I'm going to go look into this group much more because it's the majority of the group and they're actually pulling down the team completely. And it could very well be that that group also has a very small participation rate. So as leaders, practically when you start to improve on response rates, you will see that your numbers may tank, but it will be much more closer to reality. Most people who take the survey without you asking them to take it are your folks who are like either too happy or too sad. You don't have to ask them to take the survey. But there'll be somewhere in the middle folks or those folks who are like, hey, I don't want to participate in the survey because I'm not happy, but now my manager's asking me, maybe I will do it. So getting a higher response rate is super important. And then looking at weighted average is super important. So how do you calculate this, right? You calculate this either in Google Sheets or Excel or in Python by finding out like, okay, what is my averages, yeah, for each of these subcategories or groups. And then you look at what proportion they are. So in this case, 30 over 60, 20 over 60, 10 over 60. And it's nothing but a percentage. Look at this. This is 50%. of 80 plus, this would be 20 over 60 of 100. So this is a proportion of each of these. You can add up that way as well. So it's same as you take 60 below each of these numbers and you can get a proportion that you can keep adding. And you can get a weighted average calculated even by percentages. So you could be given, okay, this group is 50%, you don't have the actual numbers, but it could be given percentages. Given percentages, you could still calculate the sum of weighted average. Yeah? And there are so many such examples, but before you do that, in Google and Excel sheets, you can calculate using this function average.weighted. You give it the values, and then this is the column of all the values. In this case, it could be this, and then weights, it could be this one. The number of people is the weights. You can also not use this formula which creates the weighted average, but you can also do a sum of product, which is this. You can use sum product, which is multiplying the weights times the values. So you give it weights, comma values, divided by sum of weights, which is this one. So you could do it in so many ways in Google Sheets or in Python to calculate it, or in Excel. But weighted average, there's many such examples. You could be like not just looking at employee satisfaction. You could look at weighted average for like, hey, code check-ins. I want to look at this metric, not employee satisfaction, but I want to look at code check-ins, and I want to look at it by different groups, front end versus back end. So look at that by those two categories. So instead of groups or teams, you want to look at like categories of people, front end versus back end. You want to look at like code reviews as another metric. So there's so many things you can start looking at, and you want to break it down by, let's say, country. How is my team in India doing compared to team in US, compared to team in China, and so on and so forth. So you can start to realize that, hey, if there are certain groups that are unequal, like front end and back end, you want to look at them in isolation. You want to look at certain countries who have certain types of projects in isolation than certain other countries. And if certain countries have much larger number of people than other countries, you want to look at it that way. So don't look at just the average. Look at the weighted average. And same for your portfolio analysis. If you have a asset allocation plan, you might see that different assets have a different contribution to your overall portfolio performance, and you want to look at a weighted average there as well. Okay, so weighted average, super important. In essence, it is you look at number of people in group 1 times average of that group 1 plus number of people in group 2, average times group 2, number of people in group 3, average times group 3. People can be replaced by check-ins, it could be replaced by reviews, it could be replaced by percentage portfolio gain, or whatever. So you could replace this by that, and this could also be a proportion, and then this is the average in this case, is the metric that we're using. Yeah. So weighted average, it could be ESAT could be the metric, it could be any other metric that you would want to use to measure overall performance of how your business is doing, and you'll be much more closer to the truth if you look at weighted average, and if you look at improving your survey responses and actually getting closer to reality. Right? Thanks.